Hello, everybody. Welcome to Popular Music Books in Process, a book series sponsored by the Pop Conference, IASPM US, and the Journal of Popular Music Studies. Um, we meet every couple of weeks, and our next event, January 21st, is going to feature Jabari Evans and his book Hip Hop Civics: Connected Learning in the Rap Classroom on University of Michigan Press. But today, also on the hip hop front, we're talking about MF Doom and SH Fernando Jr.'s, aka SKIZ's book, The Chronicles of Doom. Um, S.H. Fernando is a journalist and author whose work has appeared in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Vibe, The Source, Spin, many other national publications. He's written now three books on hip hop. One of the earliest on the subject, The New Beats, Exploring the Music, Culture, and Attitudes of Hip Hop, came out in 1994. And he's also a return visitor to the book series, having spoken with us earlier about his book From the Streets of Shaolin, the Wu-Tang Saga. The Chronicles of Doom is out on Astra House. Um, Fernando also founded the independent WordSound label in 1994 out of his Brooklyn loft, releasing 65 full-length albums that span such genres as dub, hip-hop, electronic, experimental, and world music, including 10 albums by his own alter ego, Spectre Tha ILL Saint. SKIZ is going to be talking with Shawn who's also written a book, Dummy Boy, Tekashi's 6ix9ine and the Nine Tray Gangsta Bloods. He's a writer, reporter, and podcaster who's worked out or written for Complex, Genius, Forbes, and GQ, among other outlets. And he writes, but I'm going to get this badly. So he definitely cannot rhyme anything with, say the word, Shawn.
I'll let Skiz handle it. What is it?
Isofocal. Isofocal.
Yes,
That's how
that is
Doom
a
said it.
yes, that is a right. That might I hear from friends that might not actually be correct. I didn't realize that was going to be read out loud. It's Shawn Setaro for anyone listening. And yeah, that is a jokey reference to one of Doom's lyrics where he does in fact rhyme something with the name of that Icelandic volcano.
Excellent. All right. So many, many more references to come. After Skiz and Shawn have had a conversation, we'll open it up to questions from those live in our chat and session. Put your questions directly in the chat. We always look our presenters in the eye and say, don't you look at the chat until it's time for the questions because um, that's a supply that you're not allowed to hit early. So fair enough. Antonia will do that part. Thanks to Antonio Randolph, co-organizer Alex Veazey, Carl Wilson, Gus Stadler, and Elena Razlogova. Have I missed anything? If not, then I think I will turn it over to our distinguished guest. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, hey everyone. I'm thrilled to be here and to be talking to Skiz about his book about Doom, which I've read twice and learned a heck of a lot from. So I'm very glad to have the chance to sort of dig in a little further before we get to your questions. Yeah, this is a great crowd of people. I see my guy Tyler's in here. What's up, Tyler? How you doing? Um, and I guess, but just to start, you know, I wanted to kind of get a process question out of the way first, which is to say, like, how you thought about writing the book. Um, Doom, Daniel Dumile was to some extent, to a surprising extent for a popular musician, a very private person. And I guess I was just curious where you drew the lines about writing about his personal life, his family, stuff like that, that stuff like that will come in the book for a flash and then disappear for long periods and then pop up again. I guess I'm just curious how you thought about that.
Yeah, that's a great question because you have to approach a book like this with sensitivity. First of all, because the man is no longer with us. And secondly, as you said, he was a private person. He didn't put himself out there like a lot of artists do. And that's really what was special about Doom. I think that's I think a lot of his appeal has to do with that. In fact, that he created this mystique around himself and made people come to him. But uh, I was just shocked. I was kind of flabbergasted when I heard about his death, because he's 2 years younger than me. I thought he would be around for a while, and I'm especially a fan of his latter albums, like Born Like This, like Key to the Cuffs, and I could see that this guy was really, as an artist, he was really kind of, he wasn't one to rest on his laurels. He was really taking his art somewhere. So I was shocked when he died. To be honest, I wasn't the biggest Doom fan beforehand, but obviously in researching the book, I became a huge Doom fan. But I guess I would say I'm kind of like him in a lot of ways. We're both cancers. We're both sensitive people. We're both low key. I'm kind of like a hermit myself. I don't like to be in crowds and stuff like that. So I kind of had a innate understanding of where kind of Doom was coming from. He was always promoting the art. He was like, and that's why he wore the mask too. He was like, it's not about me, it's not about the fame, it's about the lyrics, it's about the music. And I really respected that. And just being a champion of the underground, to run an independent label for 10 plus years, uh, you got to be in it for the love. So I was, just being a champion of the underground, I was just amazed at what Doom was able to accomplish on independent labels. So I really just wanted to focus on what I appreciated about him, which is his artistry, his lyrics, his beats, his commitment to the craft of hip hop. Now that hip hop is kind of conquered pop culture, it's a whole different thing than what it started as. And to me, Doom is one of the few people who's kind of just, still bringing the art of it. So there was plenty to talk about as far as artistry. I really focused on his albums and his lyrics, and I drew the line basically about, I didn't want to talk about his kids, his family. Obviously, I had to mention some of that because his wife, Jasmine, is a big part of his whole thing. And I think without her, he wouldn't have been half as known as he is today, because she was really kind of like the backbone, the foundation. So I had to talk about her. I didn't talk about his kids really at all. I know a lot about his kids. I found out a lot about his kids doing the research. He had five kids. One of them passed, which everyone knows about, Malachi, who was passed when he was 14. He's got an older kid from a different relationship, and he's got three girls. But I didn't really want to talk about his family because there was just so much to talk about as far as Doom himself. So
Gotcha. To that end, one of the sort of central mysteries of the first third of the book is his brother's death.
yes.
Um, and not much is known about it. There's a lot of rumors about how his brother died. People close to him, I've talked to Dante Ross about it. Other people have sort of their pet theories. Were you ever tempted in writing the book to be like, yeah, I'm going to solve that mystery once and for all?
I was, and I feel like I was onto it, but I think the person who really holds the whole story is Pete Nice from Third Base, because Pete, I interviewed him a few times for this book, and I was getting towards the end of the writing process, and I really wanted to talk to him one more time because he said, I've got some documentation that I can share with you and stuff like that. But I guess, in the final estimate, he didn't want to share that. But I think that if anyone would know more about what happened, it would be him, because he was at the time, he was kind of acting as their manager. That Doom was on um Doom wasn't signed to his label, but he was kind of after Third Base had a rift, he kind of Doom went with Search. I mean, sorry, with Pete
With
Nice
Pete.
instead
Yep.
of Search. Yeah, but yeah, there is a story about Sub's death, and that's one of the things that will still be a mystery, as a lot of things about Doom. And I feel like there's still a lot of mystery about Doom, which is good. So
Yeah. You mentioned in that first answer that, the music was a central part of the book, and it's true. I think the entire sort of central third, middle third of the book is devoted to kind of album analysis.
right.
And I was curious about that. Like, what are you listening for in those sections? Like, these are albums that I assume at least like many of the people, reading the book will be familiar with. Like, what what were you listening for? What were you trying to find out? Like, what was the process of sort of writing sections about these albums?
Well, being a music critic most of my life, I think that that's probably my greatest strength and that is kind of like breaking down and analyzing music, an album specifically. So I really wanted to do that because there's so much to talk about with Doom. There's almost too much to talk about. You could basically take one song and analyze every single line. I kind of did that in my last book, the Wu-Tang book, and I kind of got a little backlash on that. So the only album that I really went deep into was Mad Villain, was the Mad Villain album, because that's kind of like Doom's calling card. That's an album that pretty much everyone knows. That was probably the most popular one of his releases. And there was another book by Will Hagel that came out specifically about that record. So I had to kind of do a different take on that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to me, I'm not necessarily listening for anything specifically. I'm just kind of when I do this stuff, I'm marinating with the music. It's a totally enjoyable experience. And every time I listen to Doom, I'm catching something else. It's like he's one of those artists. You to really appreciate Doom, you got to listen to it a lot because there's so much going on, and you'll miss it, because like he'll say one ridiculous line, and before it even registers in your mind, he's on to something else that's equally as amazing. So I'm just the whatever the music, the lyrics dictate whatever I say, like, and whatever I notice is what I'm going to write about. So that's why,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So for people who might not know, there was a bit of a lost period in Doom's life from about 1994 to 1998 when he just kind of disappears, right? He is known by one rap name at the beginning of that period. By the end, he sort of ventures out into public, starts performing, releasing material under a new name, under the name we call him now. What was it like to kind of research and write about this like sort of black hole of a 4 or 5 year period?
That was that was one of the most exciting parts because no one really knows what happened during that time. And I think I did expose a lot of what happened, because in most interviews, Doom would say, "Oh, I was practically homeless." And he was far from homeless, but he was involved in a lot of different hijinks,
Hmm.
specifically hustling, And I think that Doom is probably the only rapper who doesn't brag about that. It's like maybe he wasn't proud of that era of his life. But yeah, it's all about the sources, and luckily for that part, I was able to talk to his other younger brother, Dimbaza, who's like 4 years younger than Doom. And it turned out that Dimbaza had spent a lot of time with Doom during those lost years because they were both reeling, they had lost their brother. It's a very close-knit family.
Yeah.
And one of the things about being a journalist or being a reporter, as you know, Shawn, is when you interview people and you're trying to elicit information from them, you need to put them at ease, and you need to, sometimes you got to share personal information about yourself, So, this we were talking about Sub's death, and the big the big story was that Sub had been tripping on acid or something like that, which turned out to be not true. But I personally in my life, I've lost a nephew um, in a situation that acid was involved, and it was a total accident. But I shared that story with Dimbaza, and I think he really appreciated it. And because of that, he kind of opened up to me. So I was able to get a lot of information about that. Maybe he didn't want to talk about selling drugs and stuff like that, but he talked about it. He
Mhm.
and he was very forthcoming about that. So really for this book, it was all about the sources because I never met Doom personally. Out of all the hundreds of rappers that I've interviewed in my career, Doom was not one of them. And it's crazy because we moved in the same circles, and I lived in New York through the whole decade of the 90s, even never crossed paths with the guy, which is crazy because Prince Paul is kind of a central figure for Doom, and I'm also good friends with Paul. I put out his first solo record on WordSound, Psychoanalysis, and in fact, if I recall, it was Paul who first told me that Doom had reinvented himself, and because I knew him as Zevlov X from KMD,
Mhm.
and then when those first Fondulum singles were coming out in the late 90s, kind of no one knew who this MF Doom was. And I think it was Paul who told me that. So it's
Yeah.
all, just to answer your question, this book was really all about accessing sources and getting people to talk.
Yeah.
And I should also mention that a lot of people did not want to talk. A
Hmm.
lot of Doom's inner circle. And I respect that because they were just respecting their friend who's very private. And if Doom didn't want to talk, they didn't want to talk about Doom. So I can respect that. So,
I guess to jump into sort of the marketing of MF Doom a little bit as he sort of becomes this new character. Um, I'm wondering how he thought about his audience. I'm thinking of something Curious told me one time, which is he told me a memory of him and Doom walking past the line for a Mos Def concert, and it was a huge line of kids. And in Curious's recollection, Doom turns to him and says, "You see those kids? I'm going to be the mayor of those kids." And so it seems like he had his comps, to use a term of art in mind pretty early on. I guess I'm curious about what you know about how he thought about kind of marketing himself.
well, I kind of go into that in the last chapter of the book, because to me, Doom is kind of a marketing genius, low key. Like this stuff that, and a lot of it has to do with being on independent labels. They don't have a big budget. You're not going to be taking out ads and all this stuff that major labels do. So you have to come up with a more creative marketing plan, or not. I shouldn't say marketing plan. I should say creative ways to market yourself. Now, one huge thing that did happen for Doom was when Operation Doomsday album, when that was re-released on Subverse, you had a great publicist who was also part of the label, Fiona Bloom.
Mhm.
She kind of blew him up. She got him in all the right publications, from the Times to Spin, Rolling Stone, Village Voice. So once you're on the radar of kind of like the mainstream, it makes it a little easier. So like, when Operation Doomsday first came out on Fondle, it maybe did a couple thousand copies. When it was re-released on Subverse along with the Black Bastards KMD about a month later, I think that 1-2 punch was a great send-off for Doom to just get him kind of thrust into the um, public consciousness. And then Doom, he just had a very good idea of the audience and what he was providing for the audience. I think there's a quote in the book that he says, like some people like to, not everyone shops at Macy's. Some people like to get vintage clothing and shop at vintage stores. And I think Doom was like that guy. He knew what his audience liked. And it's like he knew, we'll call them backpackers. He knew because that was kind of like the people who were indie rap at that time were called, they're called backpackers, right? So he knew that he had this strong appeal with the backpackers, and he kind of focused in on this group. And it's also, you can see like when he went to Philly and he hooked up with the crew in Philly who eventually did the Victor Vaughn album. These guys were like into other stuff. They were kind of like self-proclaimed freaks and misfits. And I think Doom realized that he was also one of them. He was like the black nerd, the clever nerd. So he kind
As
of
he
fit
said.
into this.
Yep.
It's kind of like, have you ever seen Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the cartoon?
Hmm.
And they have like the aisle of misfit toys. That was Doom's kingdom.
Mm. That makes sense. Wanted to ask about his music specifically. People know him as a rapper, but he also was a composer, right? He was a producer. And so many of his beats, his self-produced beats, break these sort of unwritten rules of rap production, right? Or at least things that at the time were unwritten rules. I think they may have faded out over time, but you were never supposed to sample from other rap records, right? This was verboten, right? It was just
Right.
something you didn't do. Other things like that. Do you did Doom see himself as someone who was like breaking the production rules when he was doing stuff?
I think I think maybe consciously he didn't, but subconsciously he did because the way I see Doom musically, he was trying to tap into areas that other people weren't going. The cartoons, sampling cartoon soundtracks, sampling cheesy R&B. These were areas that people in hip hop had not touched. These were sample sources that people had not really touched. And I think a part of it was that crate. In a way, it was kind of like crate digging in a way, because like at the time, the crate diggers were like, oh, I have this obscure jazz record or this obscure record that no one else has. You could say the same thing about a Scooby Doo record too, couldn't you? Like, how many people have stuff like that? And I found out that Doom has a huge collection of VHS cartoons of stuff that he's just taped. You know, he and his brother just taped. So he had a, and I think being a producer myself, I think part of the reason is that so you don't have to pay for the samples. Like people are never going to know where these samples came from. I think that was part of it. I think part of it not was touching sources that other people hadn't. So I don't know if it was conscious or not, but
Mhm.
I suspect it was kind of like he was subconsciously doing it.
Hmm. That makes a great deal of sense. One of the sort of touchier aspects of the book is Malachi York, who, for people who don't
Right.
know, was somewhat of a cult or religious figure who Doom, since his teenage years, had been kind of a follower of. and who ultimately was arrested and is still in prison for some very serious child sex crimes. And even in his early years, many people thought he was more of a cult leader than, than more of a like a religious figure or someone trying to like uplift the community or something. So I guess I'm just curious how you dealt with such a divisive person, not just talking about him, but also like delving out information over the course of the story, right? How do you choose when to say what and what to say about Malachi York?
Yeah, that was a tough part of the book as to whether I would include it or not because I didn't even know half of that stuff about York before I researched him. Funny enough, I had met him way back in the day in Bushwick at his bookstore. I was working on a book with Africa Bambaataa at the time. This was like in the early 90s. And bam, we drove, like we used to meet in Brooklyn and like crazy places. And one time we met and he drove me to the York's bookstore and I picked up a few pamphlets. And that's how I even first found out about York. But here's the reason why I included York, because to me, it would seem pretty obvious that Doom acquired a lot of his love for all of this crazy, let's call it occult
Mhm.
information. And when I
The
say
esoteric
occult,
stuff. Yep.
esoteric, yes. Hidden knowledge, occult to me means hidden knowledge. So all of the stuff that York dealt with, you could call it conspiracy stuff. It was esoteric information. And I think, Doom and Subrock were in that community early on as teens, like still in high school. Initially they were a Nation of Islam. Then I guess after their parents divorced, they kind of started going with the Ansars.
Ansar.
Yeah, Ansaru Allah community. And I thought, in researching that chapter, I thought this was incredibly interesting. I mean, York, he changed identities like nothing too. And I think that was also maybe an influence on Doom too. Because as I say in the book, York at one point said he was a green skinned reptilian from the planet Risk, like with the straight face, he represented himself as that. And then immediately I'm thinking of King Ghidorah, which is another one of Doom's personas. So I you got to kind of make connections like that. And one thing about Doom is like there's very little that he says about the Ansars. Like
hmm
I scoured the internet, there's a couple quotes in there. I think I think one of the funniest things he says is like he doesn't try to defend them, but he says, "Hey, I never seen a bunch of people get together and no one's smoking a cigarette." That was kind of like his way of defending the Ansars because there was a journalist from New York Magazine who actually went down to Atlanta, went to their compound and did a whole expose on that. And I think Doom he might have run into Doom down there, as a matter of fact. But I think after their early teen time, Doom didn't really have much to do with the Ansars, but he was definitely into all of this esoteric knowledge, and that was a lifelong pursuit of his. And I think even towards the end of his life, I think he was more into that than into making music. He was into these YouTube rabbit hole type things, and it
Did
was.
your attitude toward any of that stuff change while writing the book?
What do you mean?
Toward any of the kind of like esoteric occult
Oh,
stuff?
I'm totally into that stuff myself. So,
Oh, great.
you
So
know,
it wasn't a reach.
no,
Yeah.
no, not at all. I mean, to me, that is like people always ask me, like, if you ever met Doom, like, what would to me, that would be the most interesting thing to talk with about Doom. And I'm sure he's had this conversation with his people, with his inner circle, people like Curious and Big Ben Klingon. But he's a scientist. Like I've studied this stuff for 30 years, but Doom is like really, I would love to have a conversation with him about stuff like that because I'm into it myself. So
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the maybe the most unique thing about Doom that comes off in the book in terms of his rapping style is this thing about, rapping about himself in the third person, right? Rapping about him when he's rapping, he's saying, Doom does this, Doom did that.
right, brilliant.
Why is that? Is that actually an innovation? Like, is that the first time that a rapper does that so consistently? And like, is that an innovation that you think is like transferable in any way, or does it kind of end with him?
I mean, I think other people can do it. Doom did it first. I mean, that's to me, that's huge. Like that's such a brilliant conceit to rap in the third person because no one else is doing it. It's like it's always like the rappers are representing themselves as the man and they're the one who's doing it. Because to me, that whole conceit sets up the fact that Doom is a writer. He's not an MC. He's not a rapper. He never represented himself as such. He represented himself as a writer. And as a writer, you can write for different characters. So it all makes perfect sense to me in that respect. And to to me, it's also like a big uh it's like a big fuck you to the art form in a way because that's part of Doom's subversive nature. Everyone else is going one way and he's the only one going in the opposite direction. And this is just one example of it.
Yeah.
The mask is another. Who would have the balls to do something like that? Now, if someone did that, they're just going to be kind of
Mhm.
copying Doom. I mean,
Right.
obviously, there are people who kind of hide their identity. But Doom was the guy. Doom did it first, and he was the original. He did it the best.
Yeah. I mean,
There's
one
never
thing
going to
that
be.
comes through in the book, and I think even in the event you did the Brooklyn Museum, the conversation you had revealed this a little bit. There were so many successful rappers who were so jealous that he did that and that they didn't, in that he could take off his mask and be in public more or less whenever he wanted, and fans wouldn't recognize him. I thought that was so fascinating. Even people like Nas were like, God damn it, why didn't I think of that?
Exactly. He kind of, because he had had that early bout with fame with KMD and he didn't like it, right?
Hmm.
And I don't blame him. It's like, especially being such a private person, and imagine like you're an introvert and your job is to be entertaining people on stage and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
it was a beautiful way to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Toward the end of the trajectory of Doom's career is like in his later years, he's sort of doing more and more product deals and fewer records. I guess I was hoping you kind of weigh in that, like what that was about, what the change was, like what was going on there.
I think, and this is all conjecture because obviously I haven't spoken to Doom, but I think he's getting older. He's got 5 kids. He's got to support his family. As I said, he's kind of getting maybe a little bored or tired with the music side of things. People leaning on him for deadlines. Oh, we got to get this album out. Doom is a guy who kind of operated on his own time. He didn't like to be prodded to do things. And even with all of these merchandise deals, he could have done a lot more. Like
Mhm.
I spoke to a guy in England who worked at Lex, and he was like, I was bringing Doom all of these opportunities, and like a lot of them he passed on. So I think once again, he chose the opportunities that were cool to him that um, and I think a lot of it was really to make some money, because and you can't fault the guy for that, especially being on an independent label. You're not making big bucks. You're not getting big advances, and Doom for the most of his career, he was on independent labels. So
Yeah.
uh,
This is something that actually I was super interested in the book is like you're very open about how he's so prolific for a period, but that's, partially because of whatever was driving him to create, but partially because he could just get a bunch of different cash advances, for doing records often under different names. And, I guess I'm curious about how you thought about portraying these different motivations as you're writing about this prolific period of his career.
well, like I said, I'm always a champion of the underground and underground artists. I know how hard it is to do this stuff. So that's why I can't really fault Doom for anything that he did, even the Doom bots. To
Mhm.
me, that was that was another beautiful conceptual thing. I didn't even know that Doom bots existed in the Marvel universe until I did the research for the book. And like someone asked me in the chat, like what other sources I did for the hero versus villain, the comic book section. Douglas Woke wrote a really good book on Marvel where he's pretty much read every Marvel comic. And also Ronan Rowe, who used to write for The Source, wrote a really amazing book on Marvel and like talking about Jack Kirby and all of the stuff behind it. So I forgot where I was going with that,
Oh no,
but
it's fine. I guess, before we open it up for Q&A, just like one quick thing is like you talk about in the book someone who was not an inspiration for Doom because I think Doom sort of made his switch a little earlier, but someone who Doom recognized as a kindred spirit. And I thought this was super interesting. And that's Stephen Colbert. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
oh yeah, sure. That was like because on the original Colbert Report, um, Stephen played this right-wing pundit, and he could say some pretty outrageous stuff when he was in that persona. So I think Doom saw that, and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to take that shtick and use it for my thing," because he says some pretty outrageous stuff as MF Doom, and he's never had to really answer for it. You know what I mean? So it worked, just like the Doom bots worked. People, he sends out a fake guy, he sends out someone else in the mask to perform just to get the money, and people still go to the show just to see if it's the real Doom or not. So they still pay their money to get in. You gotta
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. And what has been some of the main I guess, I was curious about like musically, you're pretty negative toward the Mouse and the Mask, right? Or at least the
Am I negative
musical.
towards it?
I would
I
say toward
mean, that was not my favorite
the
of his albums, but it was,
the musical side of it
yeah,
and
I'm not
toward
a big Danger Mouse fan.
yes,
Let's
this is
put
what
it that
this
way.
is what comes through. I guess I was just curious about if you got any feedback towards that because you say some, little jabs at him over the course, in the book there.
Well, I got nothing. I don't know the guy. I got nothing personal against him. It would have been nice if he had, you know, uh, done an interview for the book, but I got nothing against him, and I just thought it was interesting. I think his whole career is interesting, how he got on with the Gray album and everything like that. And I think he had a lot to do with taking Doom to a higher level too, and getting him that deal with Lex, six-figure deal. Finally, Doom gets paid. But yeah, I mean, um, I'm straight up with my opinions as far as music and stuff like that. So, but as a music
Definitely.
critic, Shawn, I'm proud to say that I've largely reviewed most of the stuff that I like. I'm not trying to diss stuff.
Mhm.
It's it's completely counterproductive to me to write a negative review about something, or I just wouldn't write it.
Yeah.
But
And, I guess finally, but before we open it up, like, do you have any, before being sort of assigned to this project, do you have any sort of special musical memories around either Zev Love X or MF Doom, like of sort of encountering their music in the wild, as it were, at the time
yeah,
it
I
was coming
love
out?
obviously Peach Fuzz from the first album, Mr. Hood. That was a big song. And I'm really bummed out that Black Bastards never came out when it was supposed to,
Hmm.
because as 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 music critics around that time, we were really hyped for that album. It was a really solid album, and I think it could have really put the brothers in a whole different um, place. I think because they were kind of like the inheritors of the native tongue legacy, for the next generation. And I think if that album had really come out and Sub Rock had never died, it would have been a whole different story. But then we wouldn't have MF Doom, would we? So,
Did you have an advance of it in 94? Do you remember?
yes, I do. Still have the cassette, the electric cassette. And I remember we were banging that thing at the source, at home. I mean, that was like, usually back then we used to share copies, dub some cassettes, the old source bootlegging crew. And that was like the album of the moment at that time. So yeah.
Incredible. Well, I know I believe someone was going to come in and kind of moderate the
Yeah, we
Q&A
can open
here,
it.
I was told. Is that the case?
Yeah, thank you so much for this incredible discussion so far. And just as a shout out to everyone in the audience, there's still time to put questions in the chat. So don't be shy about putting questions in the chat. I'll start off with what we have, and hopefully folks will add in. Um, the first question is by Mavi, and you can
Hey,
come off mute and ask your question.
hey, how you doing? Thank you, Antonio. How you doing, Skiz?
Hey, what's up, Mavi?
I had a few questions. I really enjoyed the book. Doom's my
Thank
favorite
you.
rapper, so I'm a younger guy. But so one of the things I really liked about the book was I was born in '99, but basically how you told the story, introducing all the different characters from the CM crew to Search and Pete Nice to Stretch and Bobbito, um, and even how you described like KMD's first tour. It seemed like hip hop in the '80s was like this really dense and tight knit culture. Did it feel that way when you were coming up in that era? Like everybody knew everything, or it was like this very singular culture. It feels very scattered now compared to like how you described it in the book. So that
Yeah,
was
it
one.
was I would call it an exclusive club back then, to be
Yeah,
honest. Like, if you were into hip hop in the 80s, that's a pretty exclusive club. Then in the 90s, it gets a little bigger. And then as the 90s goes on, it grows. But yeah, I mean, it was a great time because like artists supported each other. Um, you know, as a journalist living in New York, you would run into artists on the subway, just on the dolo, no bodyguards, no publicists. And it was very much community. And like when you went to shows, you saw the same people. So I love those times because we were broke as shit living in New York, but we had the music, man. And that was all that mattered. It was like we were living from album to album, like. And it's like almost like every week another like ridiculous album came out. So that's what I remember from the late 80s, early 90s, going to the mid 90s. Just this really dynamic community where people supported each other. And, there were beefs and stuff like that, but, nothing going to guns and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
People would settle it on wax. So it was a completely different time. And I'm just happy that I'm just so lucky to have been a part of it at that time.
Heck yeah. And I have one more question. You said earlier that Born Like This is like one of your favorite works by him, and it's one of mine as well. The passage in your book about the album was kind of short. What would you have liked to say if you had more time or space to talk about that album? I think it's really different than a lot of Doom albums. It's much darker, his delivery is
Yeah, it
different.
is. It is dark. I think it's his most personal album
Me
too.
too.
It's like
Absolutely. And stuff.
he like really goes in, and you can just kind of see, um, you can kind of see the pressure that he was under, and the stuff that he was dealing with. And as you say, it's a darker album, but then he also kind of spreads out on the production. There's a couple Jake One joints on there. Obviously Jake One does a little more kind of commercial stuff, but it was a very balanced album. I would say that, like, very, he takes some chances, has some more accessible stuff.
Mhm.
So that's why I like it. It was balanced, it was like,
Yeah, appreciate you, man.
all right, thank you, man. Thanks for reading the book.
Of course.
Next up, we have Tyler.
Thanks, Antonio. And by the way, Mavi's not going to brag on himself, but he's one of Charlotte's greatest rappers. So y'all check out his last album, Shadowbox. But anyways, I had a question about, I've been thinking about persona quite a bit and
Mhm.
how we don't really, in like at least hip hop criticism, we're not always thinking about persona as like we're thinking about it in terms of marketing and not always as a part of like the actual artistic process. And so I was wondering, and this is kind of bouncing off also the constellation of some of Antonio's questions later, but thinking about like how does the mask impact the way that we interpret Doom's music? Because I know you mentioned earlier it like pushes us towards the art. But in addition to that, there becomes like this larger than life, this legend like presence, right? That then fans are using and leveraging to interpret different things in different ways. And I think also about an artist more contemporary like Kelly 47, who, unlike Doom, we actually don't even know her, as far as I understand, we don't even know her like birth name or government name or anything like that. We just know her rap name and the mask. So like along those lines, my question is, because you were talking about doing this interpretive work in the creation of the book, how did you find the mask and the kind of larger than life, like in opposition to like the Tupac, where it's like the person and the rapper are supposed to always be mistaken as the same person? How did that impact the way that you and fans in general interpret the music?
Well, I think the mask. There was an evolution to the mask as well, because initially Doom wore the mask to hide his identity, right? So so he could have a private life, so he could have a personal life off stage. Eventually, though, the mask took on a life of itself, and it kind of became his identity, you know. And I've heard like promoters and stuff say, "Oh, Doom, yeah, he came in, he was the nicest guy. He was like asking about me and asking about stuff. He was really interested in other stuff. And then he put on the mask and he became a completely different person. And I think that was kind of like an evolution, because the mask did take on an identity of its own, especially like during the Doombot era. That's how he was able to send out other people wearing the mask. And I found out too that there's not just one mask. He's got like 5 or 6 different masks, you know. So he was really into this mask to the point that he would put things on the inside of the mask that the public couldn't see. I talk about that in the book, but Um, I think the mask just kind of took on a life of its own, and I think it became something beyond even what Doom could control. Because now he's no longer with us, but we see that mask everywhere. It's almost like a Coca-Cola bottle or a New York Yankee logo. That you see it everywhere. And I don't think Doom could have planned for this type of immortality. You know what I mean? Like he was a master conceptualist to a certain extent, but I don't think he ever planned to the extent that it is now. You know what I mean? Because it's like people, as you said, people have that mask, they wear it out. I did book events in November, and like at every event there was someone wearing a mask. It was so kind of funny. It's like so it became even though he used it for something in the beginning, for something very kind of simple and innocent, just to preserve his private life, it grew and it became something that he couldn't even control himself. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, that's great. Thank you so
just a
much.
little insight into that. Any other?
We have Logan next.
What's up, Logan?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually a comics critic, so I really like that chapter, Hero versus Villain. And I was wondering kind of how did you, because you mostly write about music, how did you like kind of get in the mindset to write about comic books in that one chapter?
Oh, well, I grew up with comics. I'm a I'm a comic book fan as well, but as I said, that Ronan Rowe um, biography, which I mentioned, is really where I got deeper into the Marvel universe and found out all this stuff about Doom. What was your question specifically? Like,
Oh, what was your kind of your thought process in going away from like the albums and the biography and talking about like kind of it's even the chapter about like Godzilla, like kind of breaking away from his life to talking about the pop culture stuff.
yeah, because Doom is such a deep dude, you have to kind of know his influences to even approach an understanding of the man. So um, the reason I put the whole Doctor Doom origin story is so that you could see the parallels between his life, this fictional character's life, and Daniel Dumile's life. And I think there's a lot of parallels, you know, even from like their parents. Victor Von Doom's parents, right? Mathematician, scientist father, and a sorceress as a mother. Doom's parents, mathematician, scientist father, nurse, mother, nurse who was into yoga and meditation and all of this spiritual stuff. So even on that level, Doom could kind of see the parallels between his life and Doctor Doom's life, and that's why he kind of totally embraced that persona of Doctor Doom because it's not just the name, it's not just his name, his nickname Doom, short for Doomilay, but he saw that he had a lot of the he saw that he shared a lot of similarities with the character. So in order to understand where he's coming from, I thought it was important to talk about that. And obviously, the whole issue with the Doom bots, I never knew about that because I had not gotten so deeply into Doctor Doom. I never knew about that before before researching Marvel. And also just the typical Marvel anti-hero, of a guy who's not quite bad. He's not good, but he's not bad either. Doom like to play with that gray area, the whole supervillain concept. Because, as I always say, Doctor Doom, when the character Doctor Doom takes over the world, one of the first thing he does is abolish apartheid in South Africa. So how bad can he really be, right? So I think Doom took a lot of that conceptual stuff and just ran with it. And I thought to really understand him, you really got to get into these other characters. Same thing with the Godzilla films. I think one of Doom's big things that he wanted to do, because he was so influenced by Wu-Tang, was to have his own group, him and Grimm have their own 8-man, 9-man group based on Wu-Tang, but based on, instead of karate flicks, based on the Godzilla flicks. So, and also in Godzilla, you see that same dichotomy between the hero and the villain, because eventually, initially Godzilla is like the bad guy, but eventually he becomes the good guy. And who becomes the bad guy in the Godzilla movies? It's King Ghidorah, who and Doom, obviously took on that alias as well. So
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure, cool.
The next question is actually me, and I was just thinking about who Doom reminded me of, and he reminded me of Kool Keith. And I know Kool Keith and Doom had a song together.
Mhm.
And so I was thinking about people who are folks who might have been influences on the Doom character in the way that Kool Keith had Black Elvis and Dr. Octagon, where he was extensively in persona more so than, you know, Method Man and Tony Stark's are characters, but the
Right, right. I
environment
know.
is different. So are there any influences in how Doom created persona that you can, share with us?
Yeah, and even Kool Keith did it, was Doctor Doom with three O's. So yeah, yeah, and I know for a fact that that Doom was a huge fan of Kool Keith. You know, so Kool Keith was obviously a big influence on Doom. I think Doom took it even further than Kool Keith, because as you said, like usually it's just the name. Like I think maybe with the Doctor Octagon persona, he took it a little further on just with that specific one. But then Doom, um, he just took that whole concept and ran with it, and he would be doing interviews in character, and yeah, it's wild. It's like, and there's other people in hip hop like that, Busta Rhymes, ODB, Ram LZ. So it's like Doom. There was no shortage of influences for Doom to kind of take that from, but he really took it further than any other rapper has, in my opinion. Did I answer your question, or was
Oh
I?
no, you did, you did. I was
Okay.
just The next question was also me. So if other people have questions,
Okay.
please jump in. Um, I was just thinking about the fact that Doom used other people to perform for him because they could hide behind the mask. And that made me think about there's such a quest for authenticity in hip hop. And it in one light you could think about that the fact that Doom used other people to perform for him like a flaunting for the quest of authenticity, like um the fans are not getting what they expect to get. Or you said people came to shows wondering if it was actually Doom. But do you know anything about Doom's relationship to performing? Did he enjoy it? Was it just a job for him? Like some folks really live to perform? Was he more of a studio rat? Like what was his relationship to performance?
I think I think I think he definitely I think he legitimately enjoyed performing, but the only problem was during the era when the Doombots were big, like 2005 to 2007. I think Doom was going through some medical issues because there were certain times where like the performer would where the promoter would say, "Oh, Doom can't make it because his like feet are swollen or something like that." So he was. You got to understand that during this time he's going through these medical difficulties too, and it's like a question of, do I leave that money on the table? I got a show off, or do I leave that money on the table, or do I just give my man the mask and just do this real quick, get the money? So it's like I think it's a situation like that, like because I mean Doom has performed a lot, it's not like he was shy to perform or anything like that. I think maybe his initial performance at New Eurekan when he had just come back as MF Doom. I think it took a little convincing to get him back on stage, but that was after an absence of like 5 or 6 years. But I think once he got into the flow of it again, because I watched so many of his live performances, and I can only come to the conclusion that this man's having a great time on stage. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like when you write a book, it's like I spent like maybe 2 years just by myself in my room writing. And then it comes time to promote the book. And, I'm like out in front of people for like 2 weeks every day. So it's like you kind of got to put different hats on. And I think Doom, he knew that this was a business and that this was how he made a living. So I really don't think he did not like to perform, but I think I'll just put it down to medical issues as far as when he couldn't make it and when the whole Doombot thing became big.
Yeah, that's a clever way to get around the demand for live performances and the conditions of being a rapper. Like you were saying, he was on labels that didn't have big budgets, so he had to get that
Exactly.
check one way or the other. And that's a clever way to solve that problem.
And just you can make more doing a show than you can in record sales, especially now, because like record sales are next to nil, right? So I think as he was getting a good amount at that time, so he was not gonna give that up.
Um, Kira, do you want to say something about mask as ritual? You mentioned that in the comments.
I don't have much to say about it. I'm so delighted to be on the tail end of this conversation. I've been writing all day. Um,
Welcome.
I don't have much to say. It made me think of the Guy Fawkes thing, the way in which uh,
Yes,
the way that you were saying that the mass became something of uh,
it's
in
an
its own
idea.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an idea. And you know what? Especially in these times where it's all about celebrity culture and you know, you know, putting the minutia of your life on social media, what you're eating, where you are every minute of the day. Doom went in the complete opposite direction, and there's definitely value in that because he created a mystique, which is not an easy thing to do. Especially he was already in the industry. People knew his face. It's not like he was fooling anyone, but he created this mystique and he made people come to him. And that is so rare. And when an artist does that, you really got to take note because this guy is on some other shit. He's not he doesn't give a fuck about fame and all the usual stuff. He's coming at it from the right place, from a place of honesty and integrity. And he's all about the art, you know. And that's what we forget in this day and age where it's when it's all about money and being seen and all of this stuff. And I think Doom really, really made us check our priorities and like reevaluate a few things. You know what I mean? Because we don't have to share everything with everyone. We don't have to all be out there. It's like there's value in keeping some things close to the chest. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I get from Doom.
It's underrated.
Um, Alex and Carl are having a discussion in the chat about Doom's premature death, and how so many rappers have died at earlier ages uh, than you might think given their age. I don't know if Alex or Carl want to say anything about um, premature death in hip hop, especially the way that Doom was dead for like a year before we knew that he was dead. That was I don't know if that was true. SKIZ, that Doom was
No, just
dead
a couple months. He died on
month.
October
Okay,
31st, and then they announced it on December 31st.
got
So
you. So I don't know if Alex or Carl want to say anything about that, if it's just kind of comment.
Yeah. First off, lovely conversation. I'm looking forward to reading the book. Yeah, I was just kind of struck, as you were sort of answering Antonia's question about kind of this pervasive issue in hip hop, where like rappers seem to like the average mortality rate of black male rappers is like 55 relative to like, I don't know, if we're gonna compare this to like boomer rock guys, whatever. And there definitely seems to be like a genre and a racial, if not racist, aspect to it. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that issue as it relates to hip hop more broadly, but I guess particularly for Doom, um, did you have any insights into how he was trying to sort of manage his health, particularly in his later life?
I really don't. The only reason I even mentioned that in the book, like I do go into his cause of death and everything, was because his wife came on the record for that, not to me, but to an English newspaper. And it just so happened that I was writing that right at the time that news came out. And I was as shocked as anyone else. Obviously, you could tell that he had some health issues because Doom is known for his big belly, his big beer belly, and he loved to drink. And pretty much everyone I interviewed, said that this man is a functional alcoholic, you know, and having functional alcoholics in my own family, I know what that is all about. People can exist, people can do their thing, but they can't do it without alcohol or without substances. So unfortunately, I don't have any insight. It is a thing of male rappers dying in their 50s. We've had so many, and I really couldn't explain it. I mean, other than people don't have a healthy lifestyle. I mean, it basically comes down to that. For Doom, it was his drinking. For other people, it might be other things. But at a certain point, no matter how hard you've partied in life, at a certain point, you got to take responsibility for your health because no one else is going to do it. And I think Doom kind of succumbed to that, bad lifestyle choices is what I would say.
Last call for questions before we wrap it up.
I guess I'm going to use my my moderator's privilege and jump in with one final one, which
Sure.
is I don't expect you to give any information, but I'm just curious, do you know more about the mysterious Mr. Fantastic than you said in the book?
You should ask Curious about that because he's on Curious's new album. Um, I don't. I really don't. From what I can surmise, he is from, this is all from song lyrics. He is from New York. I think he's a 5%er because his name is Pure Mathematics. He's a baller who likes to go to strip clubs, and he lives in Atlanta now. And he was one of the first guys to ask Doom to move down to Atlanta. So that's all I can tell about the guy. And the reason I think that he's a drug dealer is because drug dealers don't want to advertise themselves, and it's like if he was a rapper, if he was a legit rapper, he'd be rapping, but he doesn't really want to rap because he's got his he's got his income from someplace else, so he's good. But yeah, that's all I can tell you, Shawn. Did you hear Curious's new album? He's on there.
I've heard such wonderful things about it, and I haven't gotten a chance to check it out yet. I really need to. I hear, everyone I know who has listened to it absolutely loved it.
Um, I think that was all our questions for today. Thank you both so much for a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank all of the people who showed up, and thank you for all your good questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to see so many people I admire in the chat. I'm just glad I didn't look at the names before I started asking questions because I might have gotten nervous.